Welcome to the first volume of a two-part series on the route from Bristol to Chester. The River Severn had its source high in the mountains of mid-Wales and reached the sea down the Bristol Channel. The route of this story is over ex-GWR lines with a variety of motive power, from castles to pannier tanks, which survived into the last years of steam at the locations to be found on this journey north from Bristol. In the early 1960s, much of the route north of Birmingham through Shrewsbury to Chester came under Midland Region control, and although ex-LMS motive power had been seen for many years on these lines, it became more predominant in the later days of steam. However, some of the last remaining types of GWR locomotives gravitated to the Shrewsbury to Chester line, with 2800s and 5600s to be found at Croesnewith Shed, Wrexham. Wrexham is the destination of this first volume. The work of the last remaining ex-GWR locomotives, shedded at Wrexham, working the Brimbo branch, will be in part 2. Much of the route was secondary in nature, passing through areas of much interconnection, such as Gloucester, Worcester, Birmingham and Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury was on the Severn, which was navigable to the town before the railways came. The opening of the line to Chester in 1848 joined it to the Dee, and south to Birmingham the following year. There was little industry along the route of this video except the West Midlands, but the odd colliery, like Bersham near Wrexham, fed into it. At Bordsley near Birmingham, we see both passenger and freight passing through on the route of this video. To begin at Bristol, Temple Meads had opened in 1840 with a line to Bath. By 1841 it was linked to London Paddington. 7023 Penreath Castle comes off its train in number 5 platform. Arriving from the west of England is D1026 Western Centurion. The bridge over the railway carries the name taken for the engine shed at the end of the station, Bath Road. Diesels were replacing steam in the mid-1960s. 1965 would see the last Western steam through Temple Meads. 7908 Henschel Hall is non-stop through number 1 platform, heading an excursion for Weston-super-Mare in 1965. Bath Road Shed had closed to steam in 1960 and was now a diesel depot. Shunting and pilot duties were the domain of St Philip's Marsh Shed, which closed in 1964. The remaining allocation transferred to Barrow Road. One of Hawksworth's panniers is busy near Temple Meads Goods. The Midland services out of Temple Meads used the original Brunel terminus of the Great Western Railway, designated platforms 12 to 15 for its services to Bath and Gloucester. Standard Class 5 73030 of Barrow Road Shed departs out of number 12 platform before 4F 44135 arrives with more empty stock for a northbound express. The Bristol and Gloucester Railway, later part of the Midland Railway, opened as broad gauge in 1844. The Midland shed was at Barrow Road, Bristol, the last steam shed in the city. A Peak class diesel passes the shed in 1965, when it was home to displaced steam power from the Western St Philip's Marsh depot. Filthy halls and granges littered the place, amongst equally dirty Midland and Standard designs. The shed closed on November the 20th, 1965. The Bristol and Gloucester went over to standard gauge in 1854, although the broad gauge was left in situ until 1872. 22 miles from Bristol was Barkey Road. 73164 pauses on a stopping train, making connection with the push-pull service to Sharpness in 1964. This service was about to close, having once been on the line to Lydney over the Severn Bridge. The bridge was struck by a barge in October 1960, closing the line beyond Sharpness. Gloucester is on the upper reaches of the Severn estuary. From Standish Junction, south of the city, the GWR ran parallel with the Midland as far as Tuffley Junction. To the east of Gloucester Central was a triangular junction. A 2800-280 approaches the GWR engine shed. The route through Gloucester from South Wales carried heavy freight traffic, including coal. 92030 of Annesley Shed arrives from the Midlands via Ashchurch. Gloucester Horton Road, ex-GWR shed, serviced all locomotives after closure of the Midland shed at Barnwood in May 1964. As one of the last Western sheds to close to steam in January 1966, it was home to a number of halls, ranges and prairie tanks, as well as the Western's last castle, 7029 Clun Castle. And this was a familiar sight here in 1965. Twenty years later, in October 1985, steam returned to Gloucester in the form of 440 City of Truro. Its first mainline run, following overhaul on the Severn Valley Railway, was shrouded in secrecy, not even appearing in the weekly special train notices. However, a load of coal delivered to Gloucester shed was a clue, and in the event quite a few photographers were present to record the visit. With a full head of steam, 3440 passes what was left of the shed, 85B in B&R steam days, with its support coach, to await the train from Paddington. The destination for only 98 fare-paying passengers was Newport, and appropriate to this video, City of Truro runs down the Severn estuary to Lydney, with what was in 1985 known as the Raspberry Ripple set of BR Mark Is. The River Severn flowed through Tewkesbury. The town was connected to the Midlands Birmingham to Gloucester line at Ashchurch. On the 17th of October 1965, the SLS ran a rail tour stopping at Ashchurch, behind ex-GWR tanks 1420 and 6435. Both were privately owned and destined for the Dart Valley Railway in Devon. This SLS tour also travelled through Worcester and Starbridge Junction using two more Western engines, 062 tank 6667 and 7029 Clun Castle, used to return the tour to Birmingham from Bristol. Worcester lay astride the River Severn, and although Shrub Hill Station was not as central to the town as Foregate Street, it was the junction for lines to Hereford, Birmingham and London. locally based 8415 runs through. .2246 and 6388 go off to shed. On the 5th of August 1965, 4079 Pendennis Castle visited Worcester on a rail tour, reliving the heydays of the Castle hauled services to London. Clun Castle also visited in March 1965 on a tour which took it to Nottingham via the Lickey Incline. The shed was situated just north of the station. There was also a small works originating from the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, or Old Worse of 1852. The workshops were small and could not accommodate tender locomotives without splitting them. 6958 Oxburgh Hall, the last hall to be built before the modified halls of Hawksworth, is receiving attention. The works continued with light repairs up to November the 1st, 1965. 7820 would soon be withdrawn, sold for scrap, and then preserved. 6435, spruced up for the tour seen earlier, and 4555, also preserved, were present on the 5th of August, 1965. The shed, which once housed 100 locomotives, was now down to a handful of work-weary machines, including 6813. Eastbury Grange only had a month to go, and showed it. It is time to move on. 7029 comes off shed for our journey north to Birmingham. The skyline of Birmingham comes into view as we pass Moore Street, through Snow Hill Tunnel into the Great Western Station in England's second city. Snow Hill dated from 1852, but the sites seen here date from successive rebuildings up to the early 1900s, when the two island platforms over 1,000 feet in length and two through lines were in place. Aston Sheds 44872 works a freight south on the through lines. By 1966, Western engines had disappeared and Tysley's Midland engines were more common, as were 9Fs. 92155 is heading for Wolverhampton. Snow Hill closed in 1972, but has since reopened once more, a much different station. 4 tracks continued north to Soho and Winson Green. A manor heads a freight before a visitor to the region, in the form of 46251 City of Nottingham, passes on a rail tour in 1964. Continuing north to Wolverhampton Low Level. Up to March 1967, this was the route of through trains from London to Birkenhead, the GWR's link with Liverpool. On leaving Wolverhampton Low Level, the high level station of the LMS is seen above the train, electrified by 1967. On closure of the GWR route in 1967, all trains to and from Shrewsbury and beyond used the high level station and continued south through Birmingham New Street. Ironically, this was the site of the original Shrewsbury and Birmingham's Wolverhampton station of the 1850s. The GWR sold their interest in the station to the LNWR in 1858. Wolverhampton High Level witnessed an engine change on the 26th of February 1967 of the Severn and D rail tour. Black 5 44944 had worked the train from Nuneaton via Walsall, and it was now the turn of Clun Castle to work forward to Chester. line through Bilbrook and Podsworth was opened in 1849, becoming GWR in 1854, the first standard gauge acquisition by the GWR. The first junction was at Madeley, where a line diverged south through Coalbrookdale and Bildwas, which was on the Severn Valley line from Bridgnorth to Shrewsbury. Pendennis Castle passes towards Shrewsbury on the 4th of March 1967, before an 8F comes by en route to Oxley Shed. Upton Magna Station had opened in 1849 with the line from Shrewsbury completed as far as Wellington. This section of line was to become joint owned by the LNWR and GWR, and therefore it is appropriate to see LMS 48194 of Burton Shed working through in 1962 on a Class 8 unfitted freight. Passenger services ceased in September 1964. This 264 tank is on a Stafford to Shrewsbury train via Wellington. Shrewsbury, and the Severn is reached courtesy of Clun Castle, heading a tour to Chester in 1967. Clun Castle would visit Shrewsbury many more times in preservation in the 1970s. On the 7th of October 1978, she is backing down from Crewe Bank to take the Fenman tour forward to Chester. The Pullman car behind the engine is Pegasus, which was built in 1951 for the Golden Arrow service, when that train was all Pullman. In those days, the coach was known as the Trianon Bar. In the evening, 7029 returns from Chester at Crewe Junction with the Marches Venturer, passing the GW and LMS goods warehouse in the fork of the junction between the Chester and Crewe routes. In 1962, 16 years earlier, 6925 Hackness Hall of Oxley Shed comes off the same line into Shrewsbury Station, still retaining its overall roof. At the south end of the station, 5081 Lockheed Hudson backs in for a Paddington Express. Having arrived on a local train from the Severn Valley line, Mogul 6375 propels its stock back past Severn Bridge Junction box in the triangle of lines south of the station. Shrewsbury is 32 miles from Crewe, and this line saw the passage of north to west expresses as well as running in turns from Crewe Works. This is Coronation Pacific, City of Leeds, arriving at the north end of the station. In March 1967, another Pacific, Sir Nigel Gresley, had been bought for preservation and overhauled at Crewe Works. It visited Shrewsbury for running in. It is seen passing Crewe Bank signal box, where it would return in the 1970s for watering by the local fire service. As withdrawn in 1966 from Aberdeen Ferryhill, it was 60,007. This is how it was seen at Crewe Works prior to its overhaul. After mechanical overhaul, it was put into the paint shop. For a few days it was actually pink before the application of garter blue livery. Out in the works yard were two more engines, 60,026 and 71,000 Duke of Gloucester. The Duke had one of its cylinders removed for an exhibit at the Science Museum, the bulk of it going to Woodham's of Barry, from where it was rescued in 1973. 60,026 Miles Beaver had been brought to Crewe as a source of spare parts for the overhaul of Sir Nigel. On completion, 4498 was taken to Crewe's South Shed for its running in light to Shrewsbury. This is the scene of its first run on the 10th of March 1967. This is Whitchurch with 4498 heading for Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury Shed had closed to steam only a week previous to 4498's visit, so the facilities were still present. The Abbey four-gate triangle could be used for turning, which has proved so useful in later years. In 1961, rebuilding of Shrewsbury Station began and the overall roof removed and some re-signalling undertaken. 45238 of Warrington Shed enters the south end of the station on the 9th of May 1965. Shrewsbury 73167 stands in the down number 3 platform, while Crewe South's 48416 heads for home on a Class 8 through freight. Shrewsbury Shed was at Coleham, to the east of the Hereford line. In pre-grouping days, there were two sheds on the site, the LNWR shed of 10 roads dating from 1877 and the GWR roundhouse shed dating from 1883. After grouping, the LMS shed became 4A and the GWR number 134, or Sala. Nationalisation coded the combined depot as 84G. At its end, it was home to various standard and LMS types, and under Midland Region control, coded 6D. From 1966, the standard Class 4s took over the duties of the Manners on the Cambrian line. 75033, adding its share to the atmosphere of 6D, in fact worked the last up-steam-hauled Cambrian Coast Express on the 4th of March 1967. The original LNWR shed had a 50-foot turntable, but was replaced by the LMS with one of 70-foot diameter. Black 5, 44683 of Crew South, is using it late in 1966. The loco shed behind the engine is the LNWR building of 1877. A rare visitor to Shrewsbury in February 1967 was this AC rail bus, one of 4 from the Western region at Bodmin and Yeovil, to be transferred to the Scottish region. This one is en route during these transfers, its western work finished. 4 white discs signify this is the Royal Train approaching Shrewsbury. The occasion is on the 17th of March 1967, when the Queen visited the town to open Shire Hall. The locomotive is D217 Corinthia. The Royal Train was also unique in carrying 2 tail lamps. The only other trains to carry 2 were the short-lived LNER high-speed flyers of the late 1930s. On the 11th of January 1965, there was a fatal accident at Coton Hill Yards, just north of the station on the Chester line. Brush Type 4 D1734 was unable to stop descending the 1 in 100 bank. It had been put into the up loop line at Coton Hill Yards, and on approaching the end of the loop just went straight on, demolishing the Coton Hill Yards signal box, killing the signalman. A steam breakdown train was used to clear the site. The signal box was rebuilt using a signal frame that had been destined for a new Blackpool Street box Birkenhead. D1734 was only 6 months old and allocated to Bristol Bath Road Depot. When examined at Crewe Works after this crash, it was found unrepairable and withdrawn. Cut up in April 1965, it became the first Brush Type 4 to be withdrawn. The last years of steam on the Shrewsbury to Chester line will be remembered for some sterling work put in by Black 5s on the passenger trains. Local-based 45145 backs onto a through Paddington to Chester train in platform 3. It departs north past the LNWR Crewe Junction box. Shrewsbury's 45353 is backing down into number 3 platform. The shed's allocation at the end had standard class 4s as well, mainly for the Cambrian lines. Private class 2 moguls were used on trip workings and the occasional Minsterley branch freight. The penultimate day of steam working at Shrewsbury was on the 4th of March 1967 and saw many enthusiasts witnessing events. Some of the local depot's steam allocation were being transferred away to sheds in the northwest. 44777 and 45279 went north to Edge Hill and Carlisle Kingmore respectively. The last down steam-hauled Cambrian Coast Express went to Aberystwyth behind 75021. Ex-Crosty boilered 92026 worked up to Coton Hill Yards on a freight in the morning, and after turning on the triangle at Severn Junction, returned light to Birkenhead. Four 5042 took the 12:25 departure to Chester, achieving over 80 miles per hour during the journey. During the day, highlights were the running of the 2 Castle-hauled excursions commemorating the end of through trains to Birkenhead. 4079 Pendennis Castle attracted great attention. We leave Shrewsbury on the 1 in 100 climb up Coton Hill Bank. King-class locomotives were not allowed north of Saltney Junction into Chester until the return to steam days of the 1970s. King George V forges up Coton Hill Bank out of Shrewsbury towards the summit at Leeton. The 2nd of September 1979 saw Hagley Hall and Blackfriars 5000 on the intercity train at Basschurch. Locomotives that never worked over the Shrewsbury to Chester line turned up in the 1970s. Princess Elizabeth climbs the 1 in 136 Redmore Bank south of Gabowen. Whittington once boasted 2 stations, serving the Chester line at low level and a high level station where the Cambrian crossed with the Oswestry to Whitchurch line. The crossing gates and the box survived into the 1990s. Both Whittington stations closed in 1960. 6201 again passes the box and the gates before the automatic barriers were installed. Heading north at Whittington is 35028 Clan Line. Gabowen Station opened when services on the Shrewsbury and Chester Railway began in 1848. It soon became the railhead for North Shropshire. Black 5 tows a failed D1669 towards Shrewsbury. The brush type 4 was carrying the name Python at this time. Gabowen South Box controlled the up yard and the single line to Oswestry. Black 5 45285 calls on a southbound service in 1966. Gabowen South Box lasted into the 1980s with its associated semaphore signalling. The March's Venturer, seen earlier at Shrewsbury, gets away into the 1 in 165 gradient southbound, seen by many of the local populace. There is a public footpath across the main line at this point. The extensive upyard had ballast hoppers in it from the local Blodwell quarry off the Oswestry branch. The Shrewsbury and Chester Railway opened their branch to Oswestry in 1848. Laterally, it was worked by push-pull auto trains, worked variously by GWR 6400 panniers, Ivat tanks, and even 84,000 262s. But it will be remembered for the 1400 auto tanks. 1432 departs Oswestry for Gabowen in the summer of 1962. Back to Gabowen, 45353 departs north over the A483 road crossing controlled by Gabowen North Box. Approaching Western Ryn. The station was called Pre-Squeen from its opening in 1848 up to 1902, Pre-Squeen for Western Ryn until 1935, and just Western Ryn until closure in September 1960. The signal box controlled the up and down loops until 1991, when they were removed and the crossing gates replaced by automatic half barriers. The mile post opposite the box showed 191.5 miles from Paddington, but this was via Oxford and Didcot, before the route via High Wycombe to Ano Junction was opened in 1901, shortening the route to Chester by about 19 miles. 47323 heads south with empty timber trucks from the Kronospan factory at Chirk. When the signal box was closed, it was removed for possible further use by the Llangollen Railway. Freight along the route in the 1990s included steel trains from South Wales to D Marsh. 37717 hurries north through a snowy landscape. The passenger service on the Shrewsbury to Chester line went over to DMUs after the demise of through services to Birkenhead in 1967, with a few diesel haul trains continuing for a while. However, In July 1990, a touch of the former GWR was seen on these services when Class 1173 car unit B430 passed Western Rin in chocolate and cream livery. To the east of the loops at Western Rin were the exchange yards for the National Coal Board's Ifton Colliery. The colliery began producing coal just after the First World War. The 2¼ mile branch was completed in 1921. There were 4 engines present in the 1960s. The most powerful was Unity, which came from Hugsville Clark new in 1927 and worked to the end of the system in 1968. Here she is being prepared for a day's work at the engine shed at Western Rin. With the coal stage just outside the shed door, this led to the appearance of the shed being on fire as the engine gets up steam with its chimney still inside the building. At Western Rin, Unity is off to the exchange yards with B&R to collect empty wagons for the colliery. Up to 21 empty wagons would now be propelled up the branch to the pit head. Ifton Colliery came under National Coal Board control in 1947. Previously it was owned by Craig and Company of Western Rin. Of the 4 locomotives here, 2 were 040 saddle tanks, which normally did the shunting work at the colliery, unless the 060 tanks were under repair. This is Hornet, a Peckett of 1937, coming to the colliery in 1951 from Black Park Colliery Chirk, where, due to a low bridge, this basic W6 class Peckett had a lower profile than normal. The chimney was modified at Ifton by a Mr. Reginald Thomas, who had a liking for a chimney in the American wood-burning locomotive fashion. Coal and water facilities were available at the colliery. Unity only has 1 wagon of coal for Western Rin. The load for this engine was 10 16-ton wagons, but was often exceeded. The first 1½ miles were downhill and required some pinning down of brakes when large loads were taken out of the colliery. The final 3/4 of a mile to the exchange yards was quite steep, and at the end around a sharp right-hand curve. On this day, Unity only has 2 wagons on the climb over the A5 road. The bridge has since been demolished and the embankment cut back for a wider A5 improvement scheme at this point. into the exchange yards, where there were 3 up and 3 down holding sidings. The Shrewsbury to Chester main line is on the left, with its associated pointwork from the up loop through the gates into the exchange yards. Unity pulls out the other 040 saddle tank from the loco shed. This was Spider, built by Hawthorne Leslie of Newcastle in 1905. She came to Ifton in 1952 and, like Hornet, proved useful with its low height for working the coal screens at the pit head. In February 1969 she was lent to Lady Smith Washery at Whitehaven, but found to be too small for the work there and was cut up in March 1972. Corrugated shacks in the foreground are the plate layers' cabins, up to 7 employed, hence the good state of the track here. The coal stage was an internal user wooden wagon in red livery. The signal in the NCB yard was also of local build and was used only when BR locomotives were about shunting in the exchange yards. There had been coal workings in the area since the 1700s, served by tramways and canal. Ifton was the largest colliery in Shropshire and at one time provided employment for 1,300 men. It all ceased on the 23rd of November 1968. Unity went to Harrington No. 10 colliery near Whitehaven. There it was retubed, but because of firebox faults it never worked again and was cut up in November 1971, 3 years from the closure of Ifton Colliery. In 1986, ex-LNWR coal tank 1054 called at the up loop at Weston Ryn, where the coal traffic from Ifton Colliery once gained the main line. She was en route for the Severn Valley Railway. After Weston Ryn, the Shrewsbury and Chester were obliged to build a viaduct over the Kerryog Valley. It is 283 yards long and 100 feet high of stone arches. In this view looking east, Telford's aqueduct for the Shropshire Union Canal is behind the railway viaduct. This is the border between England and Wales. Coming off the viaduct from Wales into England is 6201 on the special of the 5th of June 1976 on the climb of 1 in 143 past the site of Trehowell Halt, which had closed in 1951 after only 16 years of existence. Viewed from the north, or Welsh end of the viaduct, is 6994 Baggrave Hall on a train including 2 chocolate and cream liveried Mark 1s in April 1964. Two years later, in April 1966, the halls had gone and Black Fives have their former duties. After a short tunnel for both canal and railway, Chirk Station is reached in former Denbighshire. This was the interchange point for the Glyn Valley narrow gauge tramway, which closed in 1935. Standard Class 5 73141 of Patrickroft Shed needs fitter's attention, heading south for Shrewsbury, leaking steam all around its capote valve gear. The second viaduct on this route was the largest and crossed the River Dee at a height of 147 feet. 6,000 King George V heads south on a special with 12 coaches behind the tender. On the 4th of March 1967, a Black 5 heads for Shrewsbury from Chester before a northbound light engine meets 92026 heading for Shrewsbury. And the highlight of the day was Pendennis Castle on the Birkenhead Flyer. Kefenmauer Viaduct is 510 yards long with 19 stone arches and was the most expensive civil engineering project of the Shrewsbury and Chester Railway. The view from the viaduct along the Dee Valley was dominated by Pontskillet Aqueduct of the Shropshire Union Canal, finished in 1805, of 18 piers and 1,000 feet long. After crossing the railway viaduct, Llangollen Line Junction is reached, where the line to Bala and Barmouth diverged westward. After a haul is passed northward, a 7300 mogul takes the line towards Llangollen. This was the view at the junction on the 28th of April 1979, when Merchant Navy Clan Line passed on the Red Rose Tour. The Llangollen line was lifted in 1968 after freight services were withdrawn on the remaining 6-mile branch to Llangollen Goods Junction. Note the PW hut, still surviving but with graffiti, and the double semaphore now just an outer distance from Rewabon Station. Rewabon was once a busy junction for passenger and freight. Trains for the Welsh coast from the south would reverse here to return to Llangollen Line Junction. Patricroft 73140 falls at Rewabon on a southbound passenger train. The station buildings and covered footbridge are still in use in 1967, but the goods shed and most of the sidings on the upside are gone. The train departs past Rewabon Middle Box. When the box was finally closed, the lever frame was acquired by the Llangollen Railway and today is still in use at Llangollen Goods Junction Box. 44917 gets away from Rewabon on a Chester to Paddington Express. In the last months of steam on this route, this engine was recorded at 96 miles per hour down Horton Bank, south of Gabowen. Another Black 5 heads a down train under the A539 Llangollen Road into Rewabon. In July 1966, Wrexham Shed still had a couple of panniers on their books for shunting and trip freights. 9630 arrives with the daily pickup freight from Llangollen and shunts the up and down yards, by now very empty of traffic, where once there was a need for shunting engines nearly all day and night, working the 5 sidings on the up and 8 on the downside. 9630 was withdrawn from Croesnewith in September 1966. The busyness of Rewabon needed a turntable to turn round locomotives arriving on freights and off the Barmouth line. On the 24th of September 1964, the last county in traffic, 1011 County of Chester, was on the table after having worked in on the Tallyfin Society special from London. The table was a typical GWR design of 65-foot diameter. 1011 passes the 37,000-gallon water tank on the downside, which fed 5 water columns in the station and goods yards. Years later, all has changed to a basic railway, witnessing King George V's departure past a still extant Rhuaben middle box, on the merchant venturer returning to Hereford. The next station north of Rhuaben was Johnstown and Hafford. Opened in 1896, it closed in September 1960, along with Leeton, Baschurch, Whittington and Weston Rynn. The coalfields of North Wales began around Oswestry and stretched north through Wrexham. A Black 5 heads a passenger train north past Bersham Colliery, the last in the area to be serviced by rail. There was a 19-lever signal box opposite the colliery, which was Great Western, and had opened in 1896, finally closing in 1987 after the colliery closed the year before. In its last years, the colliery used 2040 saddle tanks, Shakespeare and Hornet, which is seen shunting the interchange yards. Hornet could negotiate the tight curves within the colliery complex, and for the same reason, only short wheelbase coal wagons of 16 or 21 tons could be used. In 1981, the trackwork was modernised to take merry-go-round hoppers, usually serving Fiddler's Ferry power station. Hornet was transferred here from Ifton Colliery when it closed in 1968. It moved to preservation at Southport in 1984. Bersham Colliery, the line descends at 1 in 103 towards Wrexham. North and southbound trains are seen on the gradient. Arrival at Wrexham, our destination for this video. The station was rebuilt by the GWR in 1912 in the form it still stands today. Alongside was the exchange station of the old Great Central from Chester Northgate, giving way to two signs of the former owners, the GWR and the LNER. A Castle locomotive began this video at Bristol on the Severn. Now 7029 brings us into Wrexham, the River Dee 5 miles to the east on its way to Chester. That will be the destination in Volume 2, beginning with the lines around Wrexham to the industrial site of Brimbo and on to Minnera. This will show a mixture of Midland and Western types of locomotive, all to be seen between the Severn and the Dee.